So good afternoon, colleagues. It's with great pleasure that I welcome you to this event, which is a panel discussion of journal editors whose approach to scholarly publishing exemplifies the theme of Open Access Week, which is community over commercialisation. My name is Caitlin Savage and I'm the Research Librarian for Open Access and Research Data at the Deakin Library. I'd like to begin this meeting by acknowledging the traditional custodians of all the unceded lands, skies and waterways on which we come together today. I'm coming to you from Wadawurrung country and I pay my respect to the ancestors and elders whose custodianship, care and connection to country has endured for millennia. I also pay my deep respect to the ancestors and elders of Eastern Mar country and Wurundjeri country, where Deakin's other physical campuses are located. I'd like to take a moment to reflect on the outcome of the recent referendum and invite you, as you listen today and reflect on this week's events, to continue to consider and advocate not only for open access to knowledge and resources for all, but also for the values of community and representation to remain central to what we do, to be heard and respected within a landscape often dominated by commercial interests. So I'd like to open the session today by sharing some background and some context to Open Access Week. So Open Access Week is an international campaign with the theme of this year's event being community over commercialisation. Open Access Week is situated within the broader landscape of scholarly publishing, which is increasingly dynamic and complex. Within Deakin, support for open access publishing is increasing alongside growing concerns about the commercialisation of scholarly publishing. Open Access Week invites members of the Deakin research community to bravely engage in candid conversations about which approaches to open scholarship prioritise the best interests of the public and the academic community, and which don't. Today's event is part of a series of events hosted by the library to recognise Open Access Week in 2023. Yesterday, we had the great honour of hearing University librarian Hero McDonald's keynote address to launch OA Week. For those who were there, I'm sure you'll agree with me that the keynote was equal parts inspiring and alarming. For those of us who've dedicated our careers to building the collective wealth of knowledge, it's confronting to hear how deeply the commercial publishing industry has implicated itself into academia and the extent to which their models work against the advancement of human knowledge. The landscape of scholarly publishing is complex and navigating it is challenging for both researchers and for those of us who partner with researchers. In today's session, we have the great privilege to hear from a group of academics whose work offers some hope to those of us who are concerned with the issues that Hero raised yesterday. Today's panel is made up of editors of scholarly journals that follow the diamond model of open access. The articles that are published in these journals are free for anyone to read, and unlike commercial publishing, are free for authors to publish. So this is grassroots, community-controlled publishing. Over the course of the next hour, we'll have the opportunity to listen in on a discussion between our 5 panellists, all of whom are editors of Diamond open access journals. In the first part of the session, our panellists will discuss some of the key characteristics of the Diamond model and what distinguishes it from the commercial model, followed by some time for our first Q&A. In the second part of the session, our panellists will grapple with some of the challenges that the Diamond model faces related to impact, metrics, and the existing reward and recognition system. Again, this will be followed by some time for Q&A, and then we'll wrap the session with some final thoughts from our panellists. So now I'll take this opportunity to raise a couple of housekeeping matters. So first, the session's being recorded. You'll have seen the little pop-up. Second, you may have noticed that there's no chat functionality in today's session. I invite you to simply sit back and enjoy without the distraction of a chat box. But please feel free to post the questions that you have for our panellists in the Q&A. My colleague Chloe will be looking after the Q&A and she'll relay questions to the panel at the appropriate time. As is often the case, we are time bound. We have only about 55 minutes left and we might not be able to get to every single question, but I do encourage you to keep these conversations going after the session's finished. So I'm sure at this point that you're all excited to meet and hear from our panellists. We're very fortunate to be joined today by 5 editors of Deakin Diamond Open Access journals. Our panellists include Associate Professor Antonia Pont, who's a founding co-editor of Cinder, a creative writing research journal. Emeritus Professor David Marshall, who's a managing editor of Persona Studies, a journal that explores the construction of the public self. Associate Professor Rod Nielsen, who's the chief editor of T-Cell in Context. Professor Helen Partridge, who is the editor of the Journal of Teaching and Learning for Graduate Employability and is the Pro-Vice Chancellor Teaching and Learning at Deakin University. And Ms. Kara Schultz, who's an editor of the Humanitarian Leader. So I'll leave these introductions brief as I'm now going to invite our panelists to introduce themselves and their journal in around 1 minute or less. So who would like to kick us off?
I'm happy to jump in.
Helen, thank you. Please go ahead.
Well, you've introduced my journal quite well. Other than what else can I add? I've been the editor since 2021, so it's a role I've only just taken on. And the journal itself has been around since 2010, and it got established due to the amazingness of Beverly Oliver and Beatrice Tucker, and it is them who kindly handed the role of editor over to me, and I'm hoping I'm doing a good job for them in terms of looking after it.
Thanks, Helen. I'd like to go next.
I'm happy to go forward.
Thanks, David.
So yeah, I've been the sort of founder and managing editor of Persona Studies for since 2015 when it was launched, and it built from a history of trying to work out the transformative structure that we put ourselves out in public spaces. And over those 10 years, it's been an amazing number of people, internationally, nationally, regionally, that have got engaged with persona studies. So it's done incredibly well, and it has benefited greatly from Deakin itself, actually.
Okay, I'll go next if that's okay. Yeah, I've been the editor of TESOL in Context, which is the Australian journal of teaching English to speakers of other languages until last year, and I'm still on the editorial board and the working parties for it. It focuses on anything to do with English language teaching and learning in Australia in all education sectors, but also includes some international scope for things which resonate with Australia. And it was an interesting time during my editorship because I was part of the process of turning it from a print journal into an online open access journal hosted by Deakin, which is quite a good learning experience.
Oh, you can go, Anthony.
No, go, Cara, go.
Okay, all right, sorry. I'm Cara, and I help edit the Humanitarian Leader. We publish papers from humanitarian practitioners and academics, focused mostly on providing humanitarian leadership and ideas about leadership. So it's kind of a transformative space for voices that wouldn't otherwise be heard. And this year we started publishing in French too, which has kind of widened our scope and increased that space even further. So yeah, it's lovely to be here, and thanks for having me.
Thanks, everyone. So I'm the founding co-editor of a journal called Cinder. My other co-editor is Hayley Elliott Ryan, a Deakin alumni, and basically we publish research coming out of creative writing, not in the sense of publishing creative practice, which is covered by other journals. And we are kind of a sibling journal with a very established, long-running, also open access journal called Text, which has sort of massive international standing and is one of the rare global journals that produce very high creative writing scholarship. So the journal publishes only scholarly articles, which sometimes, and not literary studies articles. So sometimes we need to educate even our authors about what kinds of work we really want to provide a platform for. And then we publish some commissioned creative pieces just to air some unusual works that might not find also a place in a commercial environment so much, but often those writers go on. For example, we published a small piece by Deborah Dank, who has been winning literary prizes across Australia sort of relentlessly all of 2023. So sometimes people begin in that place. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thanks, everyone. What a interesting and diverse set of journals that you're all looking after. So now I'm going to pose our first question, which I'll invite you all to discuss for about 10 minutes, and then we'll open for some questions for our audience. So here we go. What are the key characteristics that distinguish diamond open access journals from commercial models? Why should academics consider publishing in a diamond open access journal instead of with a commercial publisher? He's going to kick us off. Thanks, David.
Yeah, it's really interesting to think about how scholarly work, academic work moves around the planet. And it's very important to understand that a lot of, and you have obviously connected to other things around this and other events in the Open Access Week sort of material, is how much is shaped by almost an indiscriminate relationship of the journal to the author and to the reviewers. I'm constantly contacted in terms of reviewing for many other journals, but it is automated. And it's not to say that we don't automate some things that relate to what we're doing in our diamond world of journals, but it is really important to understand that you are better connected to a range of scholars than anything that operates in the commercial academic world. And I think that is profound, and also has produced more interesting content in a lot of ways, whether in special issues. I remember connecting to a commercial journal publication, and it was almost impossible because they actually charged as you moved into making a special issue for the group of people who are involved. We don't operate that way in persona studies, and no one in our dimensions goes that way. I'll stop there.
I might jump in because as you were talking, the word inclusive came to my mind. And I think that really sits at the heart of what distinguishes a diamond open access journal from a commercial one, is that it is about inviting anyone who wants to be part of sharing their research or part of the scholarly discussion to be part of that discussion, that we're not locked behind something, that it is accessible to whoever wishes to be part of it, as long as they've got internet connection. I guess that would be the caveat.
And I would add just back to that is it allows us to actually play across disciplines where new ideas are coming from. And one of the weaknesses of the other models is actually the discipline control that goes on within it. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, just to comment, I completely agree. And I think it is about a sense of community, a wider community that's possible with more commercial sort of options, and also a sense of ownership of the field, I think is important too.
It's almost, I think that sorry, I was just saying, I think when you talk about ownership, it's almost like we've got greater agency and we're more empowered as the scholars of this area across the world to shape it in the ways that we think it can and should be shaped, responding to the things that we think are appropriate and timely to respond to.
That's correct, yeah.
Sorry, Cara, I think I jumped in on top of you.
No, that's all right. I was just going to say that empowerment is a really important thing for the journal that I work for. I don't think that there would be much space at all if it wasn't a diamond journal model. The prohibitive cost is just something that would mean that most of our authors wouldn't be published at all, or wouldn't have a place to publish at all. And that is because they come from places where they're not earning as much money, or their organizations can't support them. There isn't the funds. So, you know, that would be a whole section of, like, a massive swathe of the world wouldn't be able to have a say about these important issues that obviously they're writing about.
I think too. So yeah, I totally agree. And I think also for authors to value the intellectual property, sorry to use that word, that they are tirelessly working on. You know, an article can take someone up to a year, 2 years, 3 years of kind of often unremunerated labor, especially if the person isn't in an ongoing position. And then the idea that they are somehow, through all these mechanisms, which I'm sure other events this week will cover very closely, through mechanisms that maybe they also don't fully understand, they are effectively making themselves unable to access their peers' work, because unless they're in an ongoing position and can have library access to certain paywalled journals, they may actually not be able to read what their peers are writing about. And I can't see in any way how this is good for intellectual culture, and also for the, in a way, publicly funded work of knowledge creation. We're all publicly funded in a way by our nations or our states. And, you know, where there's disadvantages there, there's also the fact that that should then benefit every person in, you know, in those communities, and not just a very kind of filtered band of people, I think, for knowledge to really be disseminated truly.
You asked the question about why an academic would want to publish in an open, diamond open access. And the other thing I'm thinking of is that they're part of a movement of change. It's almost like, you know, we're reforming this. It doesn't have to be the commercial, you know, profit-making entities. We're proving that actually we can do this ourselves. We can reclaim that. And so publish in these diamond open access journals, because you're part of making a difference.
I wanted to add that one of the things that I developed before Persona Studies was a journal called MC, a Journal of Media and Culture, which is now part of it, but it's run out of QUT, and it was an interesting sort of thing, because we played very strongly with the idea that we weren't going between 5,000 and 8,000 words. We wanted people to write 2,000 words. We turned it around that we were trying to publish within a month after blind peer reviews when someone submitted. And we generated a rapid speed of actually getting new conceptual ideas out. And we did it in groups. We'd had a one name word for every issue. And that's how people got involved in it. So it could be given it was about media and culture, it could be open media and culture, could have been anything like that. But it was massive in terms of how it has done over the last, what are we at, 25 years. So including Persona Studies at 10 years, they've done amazing connections to all sorts of variations of scholarship.
Yeah, I think speed's really important for the humanitarian leader as well, because, you know, the crisis happens so fast and so quickly, and, you know, being able to turn them around and not waiting 2.5 years before they even reach an audience is massive. You know, we were writing about, you know, authors were publishing stuff on COVID while it was still affecting communities around the world. And I think it makes a massive difference. Like, it's sometimes too late when it's takes such a long time to go through such long processes to get to people who need to read it or want to read it.
I think I agree, Cara and David. David, I'm in MC Journal. I'm so glad you were part of it. So I have a great article in there that I'm very proud of. No, but I think also somehow about breaking some of the wearing down, dismantling, whatever you like, some of the incredibly, I would say, persecutory reviewing processes that are involved in some commercial journals, where when I speak to peers in other areas who feel like they have to publish in those, it's like they are voluntarily submitting themselves to a kind of bullying regime over several years. And it's as if they think, this is what I have to do. This is what I have to put myself through in order to earn my academic stripes. But I also don't know that we do our most expansive and generative and wild radical thinking under those conditions. I think it tends to shrink the nature of the thought that we risk and the words that we put on the page. And when I hear about this, I think this is a kind of training that people only pass on. They rarely overturn it. They actually just replicate it in their experience then of being a reviewer. They think this is what a review is. It's a little bit nasty. It undermines, it takes 3 years work and says, maybe we won't publish it. Actually, not publishable. And I think that the open access journals, I can't speak for my peers here, but there's a mentoring aspect in terms of scholarship. You work with an article, and if someone's actually showing resistance, sometimes it's for good reason. Sometimes there's things to be done there, or they've really got an idea that they feel the field isn't ready for. But, you know, we want to work on that threshold of newness, of inventiveness, I think.
Yeah, and we're always dealing with the relationship to science and the movement of information and knowledge. And science has gone for about 400 years in determining what is the aspect that defines something that is new, something that challenges what existed before. And we all play in that space. The difference is that it was perfectly probably fine in the middle part of the previous century to begin a journal and expand it and work on it in a very particular way. Now there's a kind of dichotomous sort of structure, and in terms of the way that they are ranked, which we don't necessarily connect to as we move into our areas, because a bit what Antonia said, which is that, you know, you can't guarantee that they're going in a direction that is innovative, that is challenging, but it is appealing to a citation list that was already in the journal itself. And that comes from a science tradition, a long science tradition. It's not that science is bad in any way, that in terms of how it set all this up over the last 300 or 400 years, but it has become normalized that unless you are part of what already exists within a journal, you will not advance in that journal, even though your idea might be incredible.
Yeah, and just to reiterate, I mean, it's very daunting for academics starting off in their fields to try and publish, have that sort of pressure to publish in those Q1 journals, commercial journals and so on. Whereas in fact, I mean, arguably there's a wider dissemination possibility with open access journals. And I was checking recently, something like 29,000 up to 29,000 open access journals. So there's a whole field out there, but of course there is this delicate balance of you know, citations against knowledge. I guess that's what we're all involved in.
I think also it's just very interesting to see who pays for what work. I think that's always just a fascinating question. And I really wonder whether authors always understand that sometimes the people doing the work are not really given a choice about where that work will go, I think. And when you press the little button on commercial publication and say, would you like this to be open access? And you think, oh, yes, I would, of course. And then it asks you to send £15,000 to the following bank account. It's an amusing moment, but not one that one wants to repeat very often. Yeah, so I think that's a question for authors. If you're in the audience of, you know, where do you want your work to go? And who deserves to be able to read it, I think is a really important thing. And sometimes commercial journals do add something. They add certain kinds of proofreading, labor. You know, some commercial journals, I'm like, you do a lot of work, I see, but others do very little because it's all automated. And that's kind of chilling in a way. No work being done and a lot of remuneration for not contributing anything.
It's about the locus of control in so many ways, so that, you know, it's as an author, I think we should have control over the ways that we want to have impact and our work get out there. And it's just disheartening sometimes, because it is, let's be honest, there's a push within Australian higher education to, if you want to achieve personal promotion to whatever level in academia, have you got your Q1 pubs? Have you got this? Da, 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 da. So I think it's a bit of an interesting complex thing that we're part of, and I'd like to see that we continue to challenge the assumption that there's only one way, and that there are so many different ways of demonstrating impact, of proving your ability to engage with your scholarly community, so that you make a difference in the world.
One of the things I would add to those things that we're talking about as well, we brought up the idea of Q1. Which is a major pressure as early career researchers trying to work out how are they going to continue where they are, maintain their position, all those sorts of things. Massive pressure across universities. Having said that, it is organized by commercial entities. Having said that, I think I've spent in the 10 years that Persona Studies has been on, I think it's worthwhile mentioning that I've tried to get Clarivate and the other ones to take on its identity, and they refuse in terms of its relationship to the patterns of structuring it elsewhere, and set up structures that are longer than 4 or 5 years. And as some of us know in the publishing industry, the individuals even running those things disappear after 4 or 5 years. So you're dealing with a different person, even if you're trying to raise it. Having said that all, and I'm sure others have seen this as well, in terms of era, persona studies and what I mentioned earlier at MC do really, really well. And so there are models that aren't necessarily identified as the notion of quality and value in our wider international community, which isn't to say it isn't connecting. Ours connects massively to Europe and all sorts of other parts of the world, but it's just one of those things that we cannot completely work out what we should do in our open access world.
That's great. Thanks so much, everyone. I'm just going to jump in and keep us on time. So I'll just pass over to Chloe now. I see we've got a question in the Q&A. So if anyone has any other questions to the Q&A, please feel free to pop them in now. So we've got a little bit of time for questions on this first part of the panel. Thanks, Chloe.
Lovely. Thanks, Caitlin. So the first question asks, open peer review is a natural fit with Diamond Open Access, and Antonia has touched on issues with peer review. Can the panel expand on the current impacts of open review on scholarly dialogue and also visibility for the work of reviewers?
I'd have to say our journals are blind peer review. Whether someone is completely blind is always a question. It doesn't take much for many of us to work out, I can probably work out who wrote this, but I won't involve that in terms of my review. So it sometimes happens to any of us in a particular area. You just know, right? If it isn't that, then it's a colleague of that person. So there's lots of those sorts of things there. So it's really interesting to see that development of a kind of open review system. I could see it as a really good challenge. I haven't taken it on, so others might have jumped into that more than me, but I thought I'll stop there.
I certainly haven't ventured into the open peer review process, and I think it's an interesting idea, but I think it's a multi-layered idea. If I just think about peer review generally, we struggle to find peer reviewers because we're not paying them, so they're doing it out of the goodness of their heart. It does take time, and our peer reviewers are beautiful and generous in their quality of their peer review and how they go about doing it, which is something we encourage and we try to support. But I'm very cognizant they're volunteers, and I need to be mindful of making certain that whatever we do helps encourage them to keep coming back to being a volunteer and doing the review process with me.
Maybe I'll jump in. Thanks, Helen and David. I think it's a really great question, and maybe it's a growing edge and does have a lot of complexity around it. Something I'm interested in as an author myself and experiencing those processes, but also as an editor, is, and people differ in this. Some people say to me as authors, they want the reviews straight to them, no what I call collating them. So I collate my reviews because sometimes there's a little bit of emotional excess added by the reviewer who's very tired or getting annoyed now or whatever. And I just think, why pass it on? It's not really constructive. It's not really objective information that aids the improvement of the article. So sometimes I edit that out because I don't see why circulating that could help anyone. Even the reviewer themselves, who might regret it afterwards, thinking, oh, that was a bit nastier than I needed to be. I was just, it was 9:07 on a Wednesday night and I was reviewing a free article, blah, blah, blah. But I think there's a role for editors. And I've noticed in my own experiences when editors falter on this, and this also can be because they're locked in interesting kind of power structures with editorial boards. They're using it to kind of apparently appear serious. So sometimes serious seems to equate with being nasty. And I don't know why the world thinks this, but how to be a confident editor who then intervenes and makes an editorial decision from the skill set of one's discipline, and also acknowledging the limits of that and bringing in help or advice when needed. But I think there's something for editors. That's why they're an editor. I mean, an editor is not just a kind of node in an administrative chain of emails who just passes it on. There's an intervention to be made, and I try and do that often, whether it's just being generous to the author whose article isn't going to go through this time, but saying to them, this is nothing, don't worry about it. Things take a long time, come back, do it again, slightly change it. You're welcome here, the door's open. You know, even that kind of mentoring and encouragement. So I think editors to be proactive, and this space allows that. It's more work and it's unacknowledged workload, all the things we know about that, but I don't care. Like this is why we love our disciplines. And so it's not the same as an open editorial process, which I think also can get embroiled in diplomacy and all sorts of tricksy politics as well. I think that it's not all good, I think, pure open review, but a kind of blind review where what's needed for the improvement of the scholarship is left in, and a writer, because we all know how bad the article is on draft 7, it's much better on draft 52. That just is across the board, no matter how senior one is, I think. So knowing that process and juggling the amount of time one has with you know, letting a newcomer to the field, and this also can mean inclusive, going back to Helen's word earlier, is that some of our authors might be in structural positions where this isn't easy for them, and a small change can shut them out of an academic trajectory or include them, and possibly they could become a very important researcher.
That's great.
I don't know whether I can jump in again on this one. It's one of the things that we always have to think about is the relationship between book publishing, where we're reviewers, and journal publishing. And what are we offered by commercial book publishers? Well, you're going to get access to $150 of our books that you can now order, or you can take a $50 little cash settlement. So there are all sorts of patterns there that as universities, we should recognize it really fully, that the reviewing process, I have great difficulty saying no when someone asks me to review. And I don't know if any of the rest of you have that sort of feeling too, but we don't feel it in our university worlds a little bit, that we have to recognize that reviewing is, it's work, and it helps everything in our areas. So it would be wonderful if universities suddenly said, yes, review 9 times a year, or whatever it might be, as a standard. Sorry, that's going on too far.
I completely agree. I mean, it's been an issue that's been tossed around a long time, and I guess universities do different things, but recognition for reviewing roles, for editing roles in workload, you have to sort of really fight for any kind of concessions there usually. And of course, and as Antonia said, we're doing it because we love the field and so on, but given that academia is about constructing new knowledge, I mean, surely it's part of the brief, you know.
That's a great question. Clearly, big kind of kettle of fish there with reviewing. Thanks for those answers. Wonderful. Chloe, I think, do we have one more question, and we might be able to just squeeze that in before we move to our next section?
We do, yes. So Marina asks, in a rapidly changing world with new communication channels rolling out every year, do you think there will be more uptake of Diamond Access journals in the future?
I'll jump in and say yes. I hope so. I think it is the future of scholarly publishing. And because I think it is actually about turning things on the head and actually simply saying, no, we don't need to go with the commercial, profit-making entities that exist out there. We can have the agency, we can have the control, and we can do so for all the reasons we've been talking about here, those values, those communities. So I would say yes, please.
Anyone like to add anything to Helen's response? I think that's a great answer. Love it.
It might have to do also with the patterns of research that students as burgeoning scholars, and then scholars and ECRs, and how do we actually go about our research. And I think even for me, I've seen the change from, trawling the library shelves late at night, famished with low blood sugar, looking for a book, to being able to, find the ebook and sort of continue on with my thinking work with a bit less marathon traipsing around a dark building. So that's a big change. And we wouldn't have seen that coming. And I think that the open access journals, where people will be able to hopefully find the knowledge that they need in order to form the arguments and advance the thinking that they're trying to do. I think open access journals are amazing for that, and maybe search engines will improve and assist us to kind of navigate that. I think librarians like Marina, who's asked the question, help us do that so brilliantly. And, the more we can educate our students on, because they're confused. They're like, well, why isn't the wiki page the best thing to put in my reference list? I think that education on how to find scholarly, blind, double blind, open access reviewed, however the review happens, so that they can understand that it's knowledge supported by a group of peers who we can trust in terms of that being useful for their work. So that maybe also will bear on it, just those practices, and as I think that they're going to change even more, obviously, with AI. So
I think it's important to note as well that some disciplines don't have the range of Q1 journals that other disciplines have, for example. So they actually can't sort of get those citations up to the same level as some disciplines. So that's why it's really important for open access.
That's a perfect point, I think, to move to our next question, if that's okay, everyone. So thank you for those great questions and awesome answers. So we've begun touching on this already. So here's our second key question. Some critics argue that Diamond open access journals lack the quality and rigor of traditional publishers. Other members of the academic community may agree philosophically with the idea of community-controlled publishing, but have reservations related to impact metrics and the existing reward and recognition system. What is your response to these concerns? Who wants to touch that one?
I think it's been said by a few of us that we all feel that peer review is pretty rigorous in open access journals, and certainly all the journals that we've been involved in. So I think it's rather a claim on the weak side, possibly.
And I can certainly know that I've experienced as an author submitting to commercial journals. My experience of the peer review perhaps hasn't been as high as I would like it to be. So I think this comes to challenge our assumptions and our beliefs around, well, how do you define what is quality? How do you know what is quality? And I think that there are other metrics that we should be looking at and encouraging the system to look at, in terms of moving away from things like impact factors and Q1 ratings and so on. I think that there are some alternative ways of looking at this that I think Diamond open access journals are really well positioned to promote, to encourage, to challenge that thinking.
David, you're muted.
You're muted, David.
I did the opposite. I must have thought I was muted and then I wasn't. It's always important to think about the constant comparative relationship that all the journals have with each other, and we have it as we go through our academic careers as well, that we're always challenged by it. But the key element, I think, that is produced by these journals, the Diamond open access ones, is something that is incredibly important, and it's collegiality. It's a relationship that the ideas are playing with each other, whether it is the reviewer or whether it is the editor or whether it is the actual person writing in it. To a degree, and not completely, the commercial dimensions have lost that collegiality. And this is by supporting this from libraries. This is amazing as to how much it has created a good environment. I want to go back a little bit to the question that predated this. And this is producing our influence. Our journals, the Diamond Access ones, influence around the planet. One of the areas of research that I'm looking at now is influence itself, the idea of influence, and sometimes that is an R at the end for those who want to talk about influencer. But there's something that is changing in the organization of how our ideas move. And interestingly, we have greater variety and innovation in our journals than almost all the commercially produced journals. And that is powerful for its future, and if we want to call it, its popularity and value.
I wonder on this question also whether, you know, in the sense that my journal is situated alongside let's say, a more established journal, and it welcomes shorter articles. It welcomes articles from MA students who often don't get somewhere to place their work, you know, and long researched work, you know, 2 years of serious work on a topic, or even ECRs who want to, you know, put, as people were saying before, faster ideas, as you were saying, David, into circulation. I also wonder whether, you know, the commercial model can be a kind of old guard guarding a kind of, you know, an area that isn't renovated with ideas. And I don't mean this in terms of chronological age, because so many newcomers to my field are in their 70s or 60s, or are bringing ideas from a writerly life that isn't kind of a chronological sense, but they are fresh to seeing a kind of field and then bringing ideas from there. And I think there's something about that that willingness to welcome ideas into the field that in a similar way, David, creates collegiality and also prevents us becoming so closed into communities that become a bit, what's the word, petrified in the geological sense of the term, you know, a bit too. So yeah, that's really important, and that welcoming of just ideas that might not reference every established person in an existing field, but are kind of either cross-disciplinary, like bringing, you know, we're going to publish an article soon in our journal, which is bringing geocritical understanding into creative writing. So this kind of cross-disciplinary work, who knows whether this article could find a place anywhere else, I think, but it's totally enriching potentially 2 fields, I think.
Yeah, I think that idea of commercial publishing as a fortress is just completely excludes like so many authors and so many ideas, especially parents. It's not even of interest, I think, for most of our authors. They don't want to be ranked in this way. Like, they want to talk to other humanitarian practitioners. They want to talk to the community, and that's where this journal and this way of publishing is perfect for that. These long form conversations can be had with people across the world, and yeah, like, it's kind of obsolete, I think, for the authors of the journal that I work for, at least, like, unimportant, you know. And we do get plenty of academics publishing, but they don't necessarily want or need to be like using this other way of publishing because it's not relevant anymore.
I think we've come up with a really good term: depetrification. I'll stop there.
I mean, I also wonder if there is some power in the hands of our colleagues within universities, because something that can happen, for example, on hiring committees, of which I've sat on a number, and I'm sure people here have sat on more than me, there is a place where people on those panels can resist pointless and irrelevant metric games, because someone presents themselves, an ECR comes and is dynamic and, you know, collegial and not insane, and wants to contribute to a department. And there's a way in which there is autonomy, as to use your word, Helen, like agency on the part of people sitting on a hiring panel that says this person has published, has a healthy mixed diet of, you know, a couple of Q1s in there to say, yeah, look, that game, whatever. And then, you know, some other articles that are about these broader conversations. And they've chosen to select where they put their intellectual property and their innovations, which is, you know, their contribution. A hiring panel can also decide on that. And so can I don't think that this word exists, but a sacking panel can also decide on that. Real people sit on those things and can decide what matters and what colleagues, you know, deserve to be supported in their academic contribution. So I think there is power to be taken back, and we don't need to just, you know, go Q1 and bow down at the altar in a way. And also there's excellent Q1 journals that we should acknowledge for that reason. And some of them are open access. We mustn't forget this. There's lots of open access Q1 journals. So we mustn't create a dichotomy there, for sure.
Wonderful. Anything else to add to that question before we go to our Q&A? A good summary. All right. Thanks, Chloe. Do we have a question?
We do. We have a three-parter. So Fiona asks, in your view, do you think that diamond journals face more hurdles than commercial publishers for indexing in major databases? If so, what do you think can be done to address this? Or do you feel that discoverability without database indexing, i.e. via some emerging AI tools or via a tight research community, means that this matters less for journal impact/influence? If you would like me to go over any of those bits again, just let me know.
That's a really great question. And actually, I'm just working through a scenario at the moment for my journal. So I got approached from an indexing company, I won't name it, I got approached by it, with the offer to, we'll index you, you can become part of our database. It won't cost you anything. It won't cost your authors anything. The authors will keep their intellectual property, their copyright, but we'll take your data and we'll put it in our database. Now, you might think that's an easy answer to say yes to. It's not actually. And so one of the things I'm doing is actually doing a little bit of behind the scenes thinking about, well, hang on, this is actually a value question, not just a question about we want to be part of that database's index. Because by being part of that database's index, think about it, that supplier, that vendor charges people, other organizations to have access to that database. And not everyone can have access to that database. So I'm walking through a number of conversations. Actually, the library's helped me out. I'm talking to intellectual property later next week. And then I'll talk to my editorial board, because I think that this is a value judgment question we have to make, that yes, we could do it, but we're contributing in some way to that commercial entity's success and ongoing role that they're playing. But at the same token, I need to value weigh that up against that. I need to help have a duty of care to my authors to ensure that they are visible, that I'm doing the right thing by them to expose their amazing, beautiful research to as many people as I can. So it's one of those interesting questions that, is it a good thing to automatically go, yes, we should be part of indexing databases, or perhaps it isn't? I don't know. I'd be interested to hear if any of the other, my learned colleagues here have had words of wisdom to offer me on that one.
No one's jumping in on that one. So I think it's worthwhile thinking about databases and indexing to a large degree and what it constitutes. I don't know if I'm alone on this, but I almost always use Google Scholar to look for anything. And before I started today, I said, okay, well, if I type persona studies into Google Scholar, what does it produce? And it produced 7 or 8 pages that were 95% persona studies, articles listing how many times they had been cited and all those other things there. So on one level, you just have to watch for the movement to some sort of database that may or may not be relatively open. I'm not saying Google is not picking up other AI information about me at all the time that I'm playing in their system, but there is something about it that is at least slightly remote from the organization of the large commercial bases of probably they're involved in indexing and databases that they're trying to connect to the largest entities as well, that it won't work for us in some other ways.
A great question. Tricky, very tricky area. Do we have any other questions, Chloe?
We do, yes. This question comes from Lucinda. Lucinda asks, in yesterday's keynote, heroes spoke about publish or perish culture and the need to disrupt reward and recognition models. And Antonia just spoke a little bit about Q1 journals. So Lucinda is wondering, in your roles as academics and publishers, are you aware of any organised efforts at institutes to curtail this publish or perish culture? And how do diamond journals fit into the current reward and recognition model?
That's a tricky one too. I don't know of any particular sort of efforts to address that, but I suppose on things like promotion committees, it's certainly at Deakin, it's in our school, it's been recognised that there are various levels for promotion. I mean, it doesn't have to be just publications. I mean, HDR completions is one thing. So it's a balance of the different sort of academic merit options or criteria that can be made flexible depending on the makeup of the promotion panels, I guess.
I've certainly sat on some promotion panels, not just here at Deakin, but in different universities across the sector. And what I've seen is it's an interesting move, and I think a positive move, to talking less about, the publish or perish, and a little bit more about, well, demonstrate your impact. How did you actually engage and have impact with your research? And yes, some folks immediately think, oh, well, it's citation counts, it's impact factors, it's da-da-da-da. But I think that there's a growing amount of space happening for people to say, well, actually, I had impact because I did this instead, or I was able to demonstrate or share my research in this way, which was an audience of however many people. So I think there's a subtle shift that's happening in the language potentially that we're using, from talking about impact, engagement a bit more, but hopefully we're not just shifting our language, but shifting our embodiment of what that actually looks like in practice, and that people aren't being pushed to publish huge quantum of work, but instead focusing on quality with impact.
I know I've brought it up a few times, the difference between the scientific disciplines and some of the humanities and social sciences areas. And one of the big differences, I think, is that, and I think we need to work on this, is co-publish. And developing a much bigger pattern of, as people are emerging in all our areas, whether they're HDR students or whether they're in their first year, that we work on patterns of co-authoring at a level that we haven't in a lot of disciplines cultivated. We might do special issues of a journal where we cultivate something, but sometimes we're not actually saying, oh yeah, I'll edit and work out what you're missing in what you're about to publish, even if it is a doctoral student. You could be second or third author, meaning the person who helps, not the HDR student who's come up with the ideas, but maybe it's something that we have to build and get more comfortable with, that almost always, as humans that are not just in the publish or perish world, but are trying to do something better for humanity and culture, we should be comfortable with blending our names a bit more than we do now. And that we got into probably a too strong pattern of individualizing, which is part of doing a dissertation, all those sorts of things. And maybe we have to get a pattern of saying we connect, and that allows you to publish and you will not perish.
I think that's right, David. And I think also the term perish, shows this is the writer in me. It's like, it's a very particular term to use. It's a violent term, and perishing and surviving are well, at their worst, they're solo activities. But we all know that people survive much better when they're in groups anyway. So, our thinking around that is also, it connects with broader socioeconomic bad habits, I think, in imagining how it is that we sustain ourselves and what it is that we're doing. So I think that the term perish points to the problems completely, and that we terrorize ourselves and each other with these kind of terms is itself worth setting aside for another mode, maybe.
I'd like to also think about that. We often don't think about how our writing moves back into the classroom. And I've developed a strange term for that called TRAIN, which is Teaching, Research, and Industry Nexus. You can work out the acronym within that. But what it is that idea that even as we come up with a new idea for our teaching world, we should be publishing it. Even if we think of it as somehow mainly what we did on the second module in a unit, a subject, a course, depending on where you are in the world and how you call these things, it is something that generates a combination of value, not only for the week and the discussion that you have with students, but what you generate. And we've been taken away that we're in this dual world of specialization. Our teaching is still part of our writing and our creating research. So it's just another pattern that we should try to work out how to go forward with that too.
I think too, David, to really, definitely to affirm what you're saying here. I think people forget when we're asked about impact and engagement and audience. Working in the tertiary sector, one of our primary audiences are our students. And we are very foolish to not understand that they are our future colleagues. They might just be in first year and they might be bumbling with a, possessive apostrophe, but in 6 years' time, which will go by in the flash of an eye, they can be your peer, your colleague, and either, a co-author with you. And I think the split, as you say, between teaching and research, which has become a little bit hysterical, I think, in Australian higher education, we've really misunderstood something, is that our students are our audience and they are bright and they're full of whatever future ideas. And to imagine that our impact on them is not interesting or isn't connected to research, I think is a big error in a way. It somehow undignifies what we're doing.
Yes, it's what we have to do in the classroom, is to make our journals highly visible in the classroom as much as they are to other scholars, because that's gigantic in terms of the movement in 6 years, as Antonia says, in terms of where we would want to go to.
Now that's a great note, and I'm going to have to interrupt us because I can't believe how fast this hour has gone by. So we'll be drawing to a close in a few minutes. So just to sum up, I'd like to invite our panelists now to have the last word and each let us know, do you have a sentence or two, or one thing that you would like our audience to take away from today's session about community-controlled publishing? It's a hard thing to sum up in a sentence after all of that.
I think I'll just follow on from David's comment about co-publishing and things that a number of people have said, is that research itself is rarely a very individual activity, and it's a community experience, a community endeavor. And I believe that open access journals are perhaps the best and most flexible expression of that.
Lovely. Thanks, Rod.
I'll jump. Sorry, Anton.
I would just say stand behind what you're making. Stand behind it and really dignify it, and then be discerning about who deserves to read it and who you'd like your audience to be. And even if it's in its fledgling stages, in a way, honor what it is and what you're trying to do with it, and do it really, really well. And then it can go into open access journals, and we can forget this idea that they're somehow less rigorous, because I think that's not true.
Lovely.
I just want to echo the point we were discussing a little bit earlier, which is I think Diamond Open Access is the future, and it's up to us to make it that way. So, and I think that gives us such, and I've used this term so many times before, but I will use it again. It is about taking power, taking the agency and taking the control, and recognizing, we can challenge the status quo. We can look to really change the way scholarly publishing works. It doesn't have to be the way it currently is. And Diamond Open Access is there for all of us.
I would agree with Helen in a major way, and everyone as well. It's getting into that space of the transformation of the way that our knowledge moves. And Diamond Open Access is way better for that future than a lot of other pathways. So the commercial one is something that we can't always take apart, but we have to make it clear that that is not necessarily the place where new ideas are really emerging in a collaborative or communitarian sort of feel. But there's something that begins to dissipate, to use Helen's term too, that loses its agency as a journal if it doesn't maintain its connection to the people that are involved in it and that are publishing in it, that are writing in it.
So,
Yeah,
Kyle,
I mean,
final
I
thought?
echo all of those thoughts. I echo everything that everyone's just said then. No, they're worth fighting for, you know, they're open and free in a way that commercial places are not, are the exact opposite.
Wonderful. Wow, this brings us to the end of today's session. That just flew by. On behalf of the library, I would like to extend my thanks to our amazing panelists, not just for your time today, but also for the valuable and important contribution that you're making to the landscape of scholarly publishing. Your efforts are noticed and appreciated. I would also like to thank our audience today for tuning into this session, for those excellent, tough questions that kept our conversation going. And I hope that you'll continue these conversations for the rest of the week and beyond. It was an honour and privilege to facilitate this session on behalf of the library. This event, as all our events are very much a team effort, and it would have been impossible without the wonderful collaboration of our library colleagues, including Jackson Mann, Lucinda Buckley, Dominique Coury from the Library Exhibitions and Public Programs team, and Chloe Hollard for your excellent job on the Q&A. And I'd also like to extend a very special thanks to Lauren Halcombe-Smith, who was the architect behind the planning and preparation of this session, but wasn't able to join us today. So to close, thank you all for making the time and space for this conversation. It was just eye-opening and fascinating, and so much for us to keep thinking about. I hope to see some of you again at our next OA Week event, and wishing everyone a lovely afternoon. Thanks again, everyone. Well done. Thank you.